Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. My name is Sifu Bryan. I'm a Northern Prairie Mantis Conflict teacher with 30 years experience. It is the 27th of October 2020. Welcome, guys, to my weekly quote. Let's get straight to it. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. C.S. Lewis. I love that. Absolutely. Now, as we've been going through it here in the UK and around the world, through this virus and so forth, and all the stuff they've been doing. And well, I saw something on the news. I don't really like listening to the news too much because it's so what's the word? So negative and so full of BS basically. A lot of fake news, a lot of fraudulent information they're sharing. That it seems like they've forgotten that we've got the internet now. The internet, even though they're trying to control that and all, but the internet has a lot of fantastic information. They have actually closed down 7.2 million accounts worldwide for people that have been speaking the truth about what's been going on. I think that's criminal, but I've got a feeling that those sites that have been taken down will get their day in court, because I think these social media's thresholds of protection is going to be taken away from them. I think Trump's going to do that, so that's going to be phenomenal, because these guys, they deserve it. A lot of these guys depended a lot on the social media for income and stuff like that, so I hope they get recourse in a court of law and get compensation for what's going on there. Freedom of speech seems to be disappearing, and we've got to fight for that right. It may not be things that you like to hear, but everyone's got an opinion, and their opinion deserves to be heard. It's up to you whether or not you take it in, or as we say, you should always do your own research. So research, guys, research. But something I saw in the news, like I said, and it was talking about antibodies are not permanent and they are falling. And but another professor has actually said this is nothing new what they've come out with. So once again, they've tried to put fear into people. So I've always said this is a psychological warfare. And this Professor Carroll, says that where are we now? What he's saying is that T cell.
Your phone has no SIM card installed, so I can't help you with that at the moment.
It's saying, I hope that didn't come out, but anyway, it's saying that T cells create long term and permanent immunity. So, and then he goes on to say that herd immunity to take place, oh sorry, he's not talking about herd immunity. What he's saying here is that for the actual disease, he's saying 70% of people will have no symptoms, so you won't know you've got anything, and then 20% would be very, very mild. Now obviously there's a small percentage of people that it could be fatal, but this is on par with the flu, because again, but actually more people die of the flu actually. So we've got to keep things into perspective here. Now another Professor Gupta, who's part of the Barrington group, that Barrington Declaration, where 3,500 doctors and scientists got together and told the government to stop doing these lockdowns. Well, Dr. Gupta has said a level of immunity in the population that ensures that the risks to the vulnerable are low. A level of community immunity that protects the vulnerable keeps risks of infection low. So she goes on to talk about several papers say that we will not need 60% herd immunity. These things are not set in stone. She also goes on to say loss of antibodies in the blood does not mean we have lost the protection because it's stored as memory. And I think that goes back to the T cells, what Professor Karu was talking about. So what these other people are talking about is, but these are long-standing knowledge when they talk about T cells and about herd immunity, what it stands for. So, people say, oh, but I'm confused. This person says one thing, this person says another thing. Sometimes you have to go um, with your heart. You're hearing all this information. What you have to connect with yourself. What sounds true to you? By all means, go out, do the research. Don't just rely on other people and hearing quotes for what I'm quoting and stuff. Go out and do the work yourselves, you know, and make it true for you. But as far as I'm concerned, from what I'm hearing from these two professors, it sounds true to me than the gobbledygook they talk about on the news. Oh, and that information, what they were talking about antibodies not being permanent, it came from the Imperial College. Now, who came from the Imperial College? Neil Ferguson, that fraud that said 500,000 people die in the UK and 1 million people die in the US. This guy has gotten so many things wrong, but we know he's deep state and we know he's part of the old boys club and wanting to bring in this new world order and stuff like that. But we've not voted for that, so we don't want it. All right. But anyway, let's move on to other stuff here. So other stuff here, like you remember China. Now they're saying China economy has grown by 4.9% as industrial production surges, retail sales rise and unemployment sinks, while the rest of the world is crippled by the virus that started in Wuhan. And you have to remember that this virus is so clever. It from Wuhan, it jumped over Beijing and Shanghai and went straight into Europe. This is a very clever virus. And it says that another thing that I saw, that our economy has shrunk to 10%. Now, I'm not an economist, but I'm assuming that is quite bad and quite large. But something that has actually cheered me up. Now, there's a guy called, what's his name? Michael Obernica. I spell his surname Obernicia. Now, this guy is bringing a case to the UK government. And what he's going to do, he's bringing a private criminal prosecution. Now, let's just read. Now I made so many notes, so you're gonna have to bear with me on this one. But I've made a lot of notes. This was quite interesting. So this is what he's saying, he's doing or has done. Where are we? Every MP that voted for the Coronavirus Act 2020 committed fraud by false representation on the basis that they knowingly relied upon false data, or if they didn't know it was false, they then passed the bill in gross negligence, which is tantamount to fraud, and therefore that meant there was a case of fraud to argue against every single MP who voted for that bill. Very, very interesting. Now, it goes on to say, they claim that there was no other possible solution. The data they relied on from Imperial College, the Imperial College again, has been proven to be not just false but overblown to the point of stupidity. but it's deliberate stupidity. Quite obvious because it's being used and it's still, to a certain degree, being relied upon by Parliament to continue to impose what the coronavirus bill reported to make legal. They were all put on notice. So what he's saying is that the MPs were all put on notice. I think he did this at the end of September of this year. They asked for the annulment of this treacherous treason act, and if not, then they would be all held liable for breaches of Fraud Act 2006, fraud by false representation, and also breach of the Treasonous Felony Act 1348, because they have committed treason against the people and the monarch, and in addition to that, they have also committed genocide because their own ONS data shows in the initial period of the lockdown, according to their own data, the mortality rate, the 5-year mortality rate, doubled in the initial period of the lockdown. So when people are calling for a second lockdown, they're actually calling for another dramatic rise in the mortality rate. Psychological warfare is being waged against the British people. I've always said that. Definitely. Definitely. If you remember the Sage paper in one of my other videos where it actually talks about there's not enough fear being instilled into the British people because they're not listening. So they openly admitted they are forming psychological warfare. But anyway, Kerbal said, keep the people in abject fear for at least 2 months, and then they won't be able to think for themselves, and they'll do anything you tell them. That's true. We are witnessing this now. This is trauma-based mind control. Definitely. Natural law is beyond the reach of any government, and the people of any nation on earth can stand under it and enjoy its protection and benefits at any time by their explicit consent. When it's common law, it's a jury that will be deciding of 12 people, not a judge. Common law predates Parliament. Parliament cannot override common law. We only have common law to protect us because they have disarmed us. Common law is nothing but man's expression of natural justice. Parliament has no rights to suspend all of the rights that are guaranteed to us by birth, by virtue of the common law. The English Constitution, which became the UK Constitution Act of the Act of Union that applies to everybody in the United Kingdom, and it's guaranteed that under no circumstances will Parliament ever be allowed to act like a tyrant dictator, because it has been exactly doing since the start of the Corona Act. So he goes on to say he's looking to serve them with the first official notice that they're being charged with breaches of Fraud Act 2006, which again he did this. Michael did this at the end of September 2020. On the 31st of January 2020, the EU Withdrawal Agreement Act was enacted. Section 38 of the Act was forced to acknowledge Parliament as being sovereign. And then it goes on to say in that same section that nothing in the withdrawal agreement and that Act within its scope could ever be used to infringe upon the sovereignty of Parliament. Now, first and foremost, in a constitutional monarch with a tripartite government, the Commons, the Lords, and the Sovereign, in the form of the monarch, has to exist in order for Parliament to have any legitimacy whatsoever, and this is well established. By declaring itself to be sovereign when Parliament cannot be sovereign, that means that they have implicitly torn up the Constitution and the common law, and they've given themselves the power of a dictator because there are no legal means in place to restrain the sovereignty or the sovereign power of Parliament, because Parliament was never intended to be sovereign. It was merely intended to be the voice of the people, to restrain the monarch, and what they have become is perhaps the greatest shower of criminals that have ever poured the corridors of Whitehall. I have to agree with that. You had 300 MPs who didn't even vote. The most important vote that means there's that vote that there's been since the beginning of COVID 1984, whether or not to keep the Tannerous CV Act of, and 300 of them didn't even turn up for the vote. Why? We have to dispense with the illusion that the crown and the monarch is the same, because we're seeing right in front of our eyes that they're not. Parliament has committed treason against the monarch by deposing the monarch of the crown, sovereignty, and Parliament has committed petty treason against the people by effectively abolishing or supporting to abolish the common law and the constitution without any consultation and without consent. This private criminal prosecution is targeting individuals, flesh and blood individuals. So these people are not going to be able to hide behind any organisation or say, I was just following orders, because they are personally being held accountable for the harm and damage they have caused. And so they should be. In the Supreme Court in early 2019, there was a unanimous decision by 8 judges, and they affirmed that when fraud has been committed, it vitiates everything it touches. In other words, fraud unravels all, and that includes government policy or acts of Parliament. Fraud unravels it all. What elements must be in place for fraud to be committed? Well, first of all, they must mean to deceive people for some kind of material gain, whether or not it causes another party's losses. That's on the criminal side and the civil side. You have to prove that there has been losses on both sides in civil and criminal law, not just in this country, but also under civil law in Germany and everywhere else in the world. Fraud is the same. It's absolutely disseminates everything it touches. In other words, the reason why it will succeed is because all we're doing is applying very well established legal principles that have been applied in every single jurisdiction since the dawn of the legal system. You know what? I hope this guy is successful. And I heard there's prosecutions being brought to the German government. I've heard there's another one. I can't remember if it's Italy or Spain. It might be Italy, but I wish them the best of luck, because I feel these people have got to be brought to account, and because at the moment they're just hiding behind their titles and doing whatever they want. So on that note, I'm going to bring this to a close, but once again, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. C.S. Lewis. This quote is a fantastic quote, and that is what we aim to do. We, the people, or the citizens of the world, we've had enough. And citizens around the world are marching, hundreds of thousands of people, but the fake media are not reporting on them. So, but you can't hold it back. The information's on the internet. And no matter how many accounts you close down, the truth will always submerge. So I think we're winning. It doesn't look like we're winning, but I think we're winning. These governments are going to have to pull back. These deep states individuals are going to have to be held accountable, and to make sure this never happens again. We can never allow this to happen again. But we, the people, must now take action, peaceful action, and demonstrate right to your MPs. Tell them you're not happy with how they're performing. They represent us, not themselves. And as for their pay rise and all that nonsense, it's showing us who is who. And in the next elections, I think there's going to be a big shake up. But I think this prosecution, I think you might see some changes happening quite soon. As actually, I heard there's 50 rebel MPs, Conservative MPs, that's stirring up the boat a bit. So maybe it's happening already. But well done, and let's keep up the pressure. But on that note, guys, take care, stay blessed, and I'll catch you next week.